Hey everyone, Azim here. We are going to go over bones of the face. When I say face, that's just what's here on the anterior side and where you can basically have all your senses, whether it's taste, smell, vision. When we say cranium, those are bones back here protecting the brain. Bones of the cranium and bones of the face all together make up bones of the skull. So first let's go over bones of the orbit. When I say orbit, I mean bones that create this circle that protect the eye. There are actually bones of the cranium that also fall into this category of bones of the orbit. So the frontal bone creates the superior border of the orbit. The sphenoid is all the way in back here, shown here in blue. The sphenoid creates the posterior border of the orbit. And the ethmoid, shown here in pink, this is the medial, deep, posterior part of the orbit on either side. So frontal, ethmoid, sphenoid. And the sphenoid specifically has fissures and canals for nerves and blood vessels to pass through. You might be able to see this better on an actual skull. You can see the holes back here. Here's the superior orbital fissure. Here's the optic canal for the optic nerve to pass through. That's all part of the sphenoid. And you can see the sphenoid again here in this transverse cut of the skull. This is the sphenoid. You can see the lesser wings and greater wing. The optic canal is just inside of the sella turcica. So here's the sella turcica, optic canal on either side, and then the superior orbital fissure are these longer holes. What also forms the orbit, so these are some new bones. Shown here in purple, this lavender purple, this is the maxilla, plural maxillae. So this is forming the inferior portion of the orbit. The maxilla is pretty large, and we'll talk about what else it does in a minute, but there's another bone here that isn't differently colored, but this is the small bone is the lacrimal bone. The lacrimal bone, lacrimal means tear, so it's in the tear duct region. So this is a small bone that forms the medial portion of this orbit. On the lateral portion, we've got the zygomatic bone. And the zygomatic, zygo means to join together, to yoke. So think of like two oxen together, yoked together by some wooden device or something. This is the zygomatic bone. This is what creates most of the pointy part of your cheekbone. So it is connected to the temporal bone, it is connected to the frontal, and it's connected to the maxilla, as well as the sphenoid a little bit here. So once again, frontal, zygomatic, maxilla, lacrimal, ethmoid, sphenoid. These are two bones, one bone on either side. This is the nasal bone. The nasal bone does not form part of the orbital. It's too far anterior. The nasal bone is forming the bridge of your nose, and we all have different shaped bridges. But this is protecting the superior part of your nasal cavity. Once again, this is the maxilla, and you can see that the maxilla, both maxillae, form the lateral borders of the nasal cavity. So this is where we can breathe and smell through. If you look inside of the nasal cavity, you can see that there's a bone here, and this bone would be right here. It's been removed. This is the inferior nasal concha. It's conch-shaped. Here's an actual inferior nasal concha. You can see how it looks like a conch shell. By being curved, that's increasing surface area, and by having a curved structure in your nasal cavity, that's helping swirl air around as you breathe in through your nose, helping humidify and warm and filter air. You can see that over here, this is the inferior nasal concha. This is considered the inferior nasal concha because there's also a middle and a superior nasal concha on the ethmoid. So there are three nasal conchae, but there's only two bones that make them up. Inferior nasal concha, and then the middle and superior are found on the ethmoid. And again, the goal for all of these is to help humidify, filter, and condition air. We all know the nasal cavity is separated into left side and right side, so we need to separate the two sides, and we do that with two separate bones. The first major bone is the vomer. Vomer means plow, and if we look at this bone in the middle here, if I can grab it, you can see it's one long wedge-shaped bone found forming the largest inferior part of your nasal septum. There's another bone, though, that forms part of that nasal septum, and that's actually part of the ethmoid. You can see how important the ethmoid is. The ethmoid forms this perpendicular plate. The ethmoid forms this perpendicular plate. So the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid and the vomer form the nasal septum. Looking at the underside of our skull, we can still see our maxilla, and you can see that the maxilla have these alveolar sockets. These are Gomphosis joints for the teeth. So that's another important function of the maxilla. It has sockets for the teeth. But you'll also notice that it's forming the roof of your mouth. The hard roof of your mouth is called the hard palate. So most of the hard palate is your maxilla on either side. But there is one more bone that is shown as the same color here that forms the hard palate, the most posterior portion. This bone here is called the palatine bone. So there are two palatine bones. We're only seeing the horizontal plate of the palatine bone. It's actually kind of L-shaped. It goes from here and then comes superiorly. So if we look on this model, the skeleton, this actual bone here, the palatine bone starts here, goes this way, and then forms an L shape going superiorly this way. So the hard palate formed by the maxillae and the palatine bones. Just so you can get some relationship here, here's the sphenoid, occipital bone, temporal bones. Our last bone is the maxilla, and the maxilla is our jawbone. It fits in to the temporal bone right here. This is the temporomandibular joint. The mandible has a few important features. The point that goes into the temporal bone, this is the condylar process. This is the condylar process. This protrusion, that's the coronoid process. Condylar process is that forms the temporomandibular joint, and then we also have this protrusion called the coronoid process. This bend in the bone, that's called the ramus. Ramus just means, it's a mandibular ramus. Ramus just means a curvature or a bend in the bone. Like the maxilla, it has alveolar sockets for the teeth, these Gomphosis joints. The mandible, like the frontal bone, used to be two bones. There is a fissure here, but now it's just one bone as adults. So sometimes that incomplete fusion gives us a cleft, a mandibular cleft. So some people have a cleft chin. That's just because we all have ossification at different rates. So people who have that line in the middle of their chin, it's just a relic of that fusion of the two sides of the mandible. One more thing I want to mention is that there are 4 different bones in our face that have sinuses within them. So to further help with breathing, besides these conchae, you have air-filled bones that act as ways to further humidify, filter, and condition air. So when we breathe in, it swirls around to the conchae, but can also enter sinuses within several of these bones. Those bones are the frontal bone, the ethmoid, the sphenoid, and the maxillae. The maxillae also have sinuses. So once again, the paranasal sinuses include the frontal sinus, maxillary sinus, ethmoid air cells, and sphenoid sinus.